Golden Chain's Prisha Sharma carefully arranged the marigold flowers in a crystal vase that Naveen had brought home last month from his business trip to Dubai. The orange petals seemed out of place against the opulent backdrop of their newly renovated penthouse apartment, but they reminded her of simpler days, the small apartment they'd shared when they first married, where she'd place market flowers in a painted clay pot every weekend. 7 years had passed since then. 7 years that had transformed Naveen Malhotra from an ambitious financial analyst into one of Mumbai's most successful investment brokers. Their 5th anniversary celebration tonight would showcase just how far they had come, or perhaps how far apart they had drifted. Those flowers look cheap. Naveen's voice cut through her thoughts as he entered the living room, adjusting his gold cufflinks. Why didn't you order the arrangements I suggested from Bloomingdale's? Prisha's smile remained fixed, though it no longer reached her eyes. These are marigolds, Naveen, like the ones at our wedding. He glanced at them dismissively. We couldn't afford better then. Now we can. That's the point of success, isn't it? To leave the ordinary behind. The words stung more than she allowed herself to show. Lately, everything about her seemed to fall short of Naveen's escalating standards. Her clothes, her friends, even the charity work that had once been her passion but now embarrassed him when she mentioned it to his new circle of affluent associates. Your father called? Naveen continued, checking his phone. He's landed. The driver will bring him here by 5. I still don't understand why he couldn't stay at the Taj like I suggested. That guest house in Bandra is hardly appropriate. Dad prefers it there. It's close to the community center where he volunteers. Prisha smoothed her sari, a deep burgundy silk that had cost more than her entire wardrobe from before Naveen's promotion. He's excited to see us. Naveen's expression softened momentarily. Despite his growing pretensions, he had always respected Rajiv Sharma, Prisha's father. Perhaps because Mr. Sharma, a retired economics professor, had never been impressed by wealth itself, but by what one did with it. Just make sure he wears the suit I sent him for tonight. The guest list includes 2 bank chairmen and that venture capitalist from Singapore. Appearances matter. As Naveen disappeared into his study, Prisha's phone buzzed with a message from Kiran, her childhood friend who now managed a small business incubator in their old neighborhood. Can we meet before your party? Something important about the Patel case. Prisha glanced toward the study door before quickly typing, Can't today. We'll call tomorrow. The Patel case, Anand Patel, a young entrepreneur whose innovative sustainable packaging company had nearly been destroyed by a hostile takeover. Prisha had been quietly helping several small business owners navigate legal and financial challenges, using her economics degree and connections without Naveen's knowledge. It was work that fulfilled her in ways that shopping at designer boutiques and attending charity galas as Naveen's ornamental wife never could. The doorbell rang. Her father had arrived early. Prisha took a deep breath, tucking her phone away. Tonight was meant to be a celebration, and she would try her best to make it one, even as she felt the golden chains of their success tightening around her neck. Borrowed glory, the Malhotra penthouse glittered under the warm light of imported crystal chandeliers. Prisha moved gracefully between clusters of guests, her burgundy sari catching the light as she ensured everyone had refreshments. The caterers had outdone themselves with an elaborate spread, combining international cuisine with traditional Indian delicacies. Another example of Naveen's insistence on displaying their cosmopolitan status. From across the room, Prisha caught her father's eye. Rajiv Sharma sat in quiet conversation with an elderly couple, his dignified presence a stark contrast to the ostentatious display around him. He had indeed worn the tailored suit Naveen had sent, though he'd paired it with his worn leather sandals rather than the Italian shoes that had accompanied the gift, a small act of independence that made Prisha smile. Darling, come join us, Naveen called, his voice carrying the artificial warmth he reserved for public occasions. He stood with Vikram Mehta, the venture capitalist from Singapore, and his wife Sonal. I was just telling Vikram about our plans for the Dharavi redevelopment project. Prisha's stomach tightened. The Dharavi project, a massive real estate development that would displace thousands of small businesses and families from Mumbai's largest slum, was something Naveen had only mentioned to her in passing. Yet here he was, speaking as if they had discussed it thoroughly. It's an ambitious undertaking, she said carefully, accepting a champagne flute from a passing server. Ambitious indeed, Naveen laughed, placing his arm around her waist with possessive firmness. My wife is always so modest about our ventures. The truth is, we're positioned to make a considerable return once the government approvals finalize next month. Sonal Mehta tilted her head. I understand there's been quite a bit of community resistance. Those small businesses have been there for generations. Before Prisha could respond, Naveen cut in. Those cottage industries are inefficient relics. Progress requires modernization. Besides, he lowered his voice conspiratorially, we've managed to secure the right connections to ensure the project moves forward regardless. Prisha felt her father's gaze on her, though he remained across the room. He had spent years advocating for sustainable development that preserved community livelihoods. What must he think of his son-in-law now? Prisha actually worked with several artisan cooperatives in Dharavi during university, she heard herself saying. Their craftsmanship is remarkable, and many support entire extended families. Naveen's grip on her waist tightened painfully. Ancient history, he dismissed with a wave. My wife used to have such provincial interest before I showed her a broader world. She's come a long way from those charity projects. They weren't charity, Prisha corrected quietly. They were partnerships. The silence that followed hung uncomfortably until Vikram cleared his throat. I'd be interested to hear more about those cooperatives sometime, Mrs. Malhotra. Ethical manufacturing is becoming quite valuable in international markets. Naveen's expression hardened momentarily before he forced another laugh. My wife barely remembers those days. She's much too busy managing our social calendar now. Which reminds me, darling, didn't you want to show Sonal that art piece we acquired in Paris? The dismissal was clear, as Prisha dutifully led Sonal toward the abstract painting that had cost more than a year's salary at her old job. She caught sight of her father rising from his seat, a document folder tucked discreetly under his arm. The evening progressed with increasing tension beneath the veneer of celebration. Naveen grew louder with each glass of scotch, his comments about Prisha becoming less veiled. Can you believe she wanted to serve samosas tonight? He announced to a group that included several of his business associates. At our anniversary, as if we were hosting some village function. Laughter rippled around him while Prisha stood frozen, smile fixed in place. I had to completely revise her plans. My wife has excellent qualities, but understanding true sophistication isn't one of them. He raised his glass. To teaching old dogs new tricks. More laughter, more drinks, more humiliation disguised as good-natured teasing. Through it all, Rajiv Sharma watched silently, his weathered face revealing nothing, though his eyes never left his daughter's increasingly rigid posture. When Naveen began recounting how he had rescued Prisha from her middle-class existence, transforming her like a character from a fairy tale, something in the room shifted. Perhaps it was the collective discomfort of the guests, or perhaps it was the quiet click of Rajiv Sharma's document folder opening. The quiet guardian Rajiv Sharma had always believed in the power of observation. As a professor of economics for 35 years at Delhi University, he had taught generations of students that true understanding came not from hasty judgments, but from patient analysis. This philosophy had guided his approach to everything, including his daughter's marriage. When Prisha had introduced Naveen 7 years ago, Rajiv had seen an ambitious young man with something to prove. Not uncommon, not inherently concerning. But over the years, as Naveen's financial success grew, Rajiv noticed the subtle shifts, how his son-in-law's ambition curdled into arrogance, how his desire for respect morphed into a demand for deference. Tonight, watching Naveen publicly diminish his daughter, Rajiv felt a familiar ache. He had witnessed Prisha's gradual retreat into herself, her vibrant spirit dimming with each passing year. The phone calls home had grown shorter, her voice more measured, her accomplishments mentioned less frequently. 3 months ago, when Rajiv received a call from Anand Patel, a former student now running a small sustainable packaging company, he hadn't immediately connected it to Naveen. Anand had sought advice about a predatory investment offer that threatened to strip him of control over his business. An offer from a consortium that, upon investigation, led back to Naveen's investment firm through a labyrinth of shell companies. That discovery had prompted Rajiv to dig deeper. His academic background and extensive network provided him access to information that might have remained hidden to others. What he found disturbed him, A pattern of acquisitions targeting vulnerable businesses, manipulative contracts designed to appear beneficial, while containing carefully worded clauses that facilitated exploitation, and most damning, evidence that Naveen had deliberately targeted enterprises that Prisha had once helped. More champagne, Mr. Sharma? A server interrupted his thoughts. No, thank you, Rajiv replied, patting the folder beside him. Inside were copies of contracts, correspondence, and statements from business owners, all documenting Naveen's ruthless tactics. Also included were records of anonymous financial assistance several of these businesses had received at crucial moments, assistance that Rajiv had traced back to Prisha's personal savings account. His daughter, it seemed, had been quietly working to counterbalance her husband's predatory practices without confronting him directly. She had sacrificed her own financial independence to protect people Naveen sought to exploit. Across the room, Naveen's voice rose again, louder now from alcohol. The problem with local businesses is, they don't understand scale. They cling to outdated methods because of sentiment. It takes someone like me to show them how the real world works. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. A few glanced toward Prisha, who stood near the window, her face composed but her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her bracelet. Rajiv considered his options carefully. He had not come tonight intending confrontation. Indeed, for years he had adhered to the principle that adult children must navigate their own marriages without parental interference. But there was a line between respecting boundaries and witnessing abuse. Rising slowly, Rajiv tucked the folder under his arm. His intervention would cause pain to Prisha, to Naveen, perhaps to their marriage. But sometimes, as he had often told his students, short-term discomfort was necessary for long-term health. Just as a skilled doctor must sometimes break a bone that has healed incorrectly in order to reset it properly, perhaps this marriage needed a fracture to either heal correctly or dissolve. As he approached the center of the room where Naveen held court, Rajiv caught his daughter's eye. Something in his expression must have communicated his intent, for Prisha moved swiftly toward him, concern evident on her face. "Dad?" she whispered. "Is everything all right?" Rajiv squeezed her hand gently. "It will be," he promised. "One way or another, it will be." Truth unveiled. And that's how you turn a failing business into a profitable acquisition, Naveen concluded his anecdote to appreciative murmurs from the circle of businessmen surrounding him. The owner didn't even realize what had happened until the papers were signed. Sometimes compassion is just bad business sense. Is that what you told the Sharma Textile Cooperative when you acquired their building through your shell company? Rajiv's voice, though not raised, carried clearly across the room. The measured tone of a lifetime educator commanded attention more effectively than any shout. The conversations throughout the penthouse quieted as guests turned toward the unexpected interruption. Naveen's smile faltered momentarily before reasserting itself with forced brightness. "Ah, my esteemed father-in-law joins the conversation. But I'm afraid you've misunderstood some business matter. Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "I believe I understand quite well," Rajiv replied, stepping forward into the center of the gathering. "Just as I understand how you pressured the Gupta family into selling their 3-generation spice export business by manipulating market access, or how you orchestrated the banking crisis that forced Anand Patel to accept your predatory financing terms." The room fell completely silent. Prisha stood frozen between her husband and father, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. Naveen's face darkened. "These are complicated business maneuvers you couldn't possibly—" "I have taught corporate finance and business ethics for 35 years, Rajiv interrupted calmly. "And while business can indeed be complex, exploitation is surprisingly simple to recognize." He opened the folder in his hands. "These documents outline 12 instances where your firm has deliberately targeted vulnerable businesses, many with personal connections to Prisha's previous work." Guests began to shift uncomfortably. Among them were several business owners who recognized their own experiences in Rajiv's accusations. "What's particularly interesting," Rajiv continued, removing another set of documents, "is this parallel record of anonymous financial assistance received by 7 of these businesses. Assistance that allowed them to survive despite your efforts. Assistance that came from a private account belonging to my daughter." Prisha's hand flew to her mouth. "Dad, please. she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. The truth being spoken aloud seemed to simultaneously terrify and liberate her. While you boasted of destroying livelihoods, Prisha sacrificed her personal savings to preserve them. Rajiv said, looking directly at Naveen. She never confronted you, never exposed you, perhaps out of love, perhaps out of fear. But she quietly worked to heal the damage you caused. Naveen's face had drained of color. This is absurd. Prisha knows nothing about finance or business strategy. She graduated at the top of her class in economics, Rajiv cut in sharply. Before you convinced her that her education and ambitions were secondary to becoming the perfect trophy wife. The businesses you targeted weren't random. They were specifically those she had mentioned admiring. Was that coincidence or something more deliberate? Several guests began to murmur. Vikram Mehta, the venture capitalist, stepped forward with a frown. Naveen, is there truth to this? The Patel Packaging Company was one you specifically recommended to my firm as a distressed asset. And the Raman Textiles, added another guest. You assured us the owners were eager to sell. Naveen's confident facade crumbled visibly as he looked around the room, finding curiosity and suspicion where moments before there had been admiration. His gaze finally landed on Prisha, who stood straight-backed and silent, no longer attempting to hide her tears. You did this? He asked her, his voice hollow. Behind my back? And you did this, she replied softly, gesturing to the documents in her father's hands. Behind mine. Reflections in broken glass dawn broke over Mumbai. Pale light filtering through the penthouse windows where shattered crystal still littered the floor. After the guests had departed in uncomfortable silence, Naveen had lost the composure he'd barely maintained, sweeping glasses and decorative pieces from tables in a rage before locking himself in his study. Prisha had spent the night in the guest room, listening to the occasional crash from behind the study door, making no attempt to intervene. Now she sat on the balcony, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill, watching the city awaken below. Her father had returned to his guest house after the confrontation, giving her space to process what had happened, but promising to return when she called. The choice of what came next would be hers alone. The balcony door slid open behind her. Naveen emerged, disheveled and hollow-eyed, the polished veneer of the previous evening completely stripped away. He lowered himself into the chair beside her, saying nothing for several minutes. I didn't know it was you, he finally said, his voice rough from a night without sleep. The anonymous investor who kept swooping in. I had investigators trying to identify my competitor for months. Prisha stared out at the skyline. I wasn't competing with you, Naveen. I was trying to balance you. Why not just confront me directly? Tell me you disagreed with my business practices? She turned to look at him, then really look at him, perhaps for the first time in years. Would you have listened? Or would you have explained to me, as you've done so many times, how I don't understand the real world of business, how my ideas are naive and impractical? Naveen flinched at the accurate mimicry of phrases he had indeed used repeatedly. I lost you years ago, Prisha continued softly, not to other women or to work, but to this version of success you created. One where the measure of achievement is not what you build, but what you acquire. Not who you help, but who you defeat. It's how business works, he said, but the words lacked conviction. No. It's how you chose to work. Prisha shook her head. The Naveen I married wanted to create financial products that would help small businesses access capital. Somewhere along the way, you became the very obstacle you once wanted to remove. Morning traffic hummed below as they sat in silence, the wreckage of their anniversary celebration surrounding them like the physical manifestation of their fractured marriage. What happens now? Naveen finally asked. Prisha took a deep breath. I don't know, but I do know I can't continue living as someone's ornament, pretending I don't see or understand what's happening around me, and I don't think you can continue pretending this version of success fulfills you either. Your father despises me. My father sees you clearly. There's a difference. Prisha stood, wrapping her shawl more tightly around herself. He also saw me clearly, saw that I was complicit in my own diminishment. I allowed your vision of who I should be to override who I am. Naveen looked up at her, suddenly appearing smaller than she had ever seen him. And who are you, Prisha? She smiled then, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in longer than she could remember. I'm the woman who found ways to fight for what she believed in, even when she thought she had no power. Imagine what I might do now that I've remembered my voice. As she turned to leave, Naveen called after her. Can we fix this, us? Prisha paused at the doorway. I don't know, but any chance of that begins with truth. All the documents my father brought last night are on the coffee table. I'm going to visit the Sharma Cooperative this morning. When I return, we can talk about who we really are and what we actually want, not what looks impressive at parties or what your business associates expect. She left him there on the balcony, surrounded by the trappings of borrowed glory and broken glass. For the first time in years, Prisha felt the weight lifting from her shoulders. Whether her marriage survived or ended, she had reclaimed something more valuable than all the crystal and gold in their penthouse. Her sense of self, reflected not in the admiration of others but in the quiet knowledge of her own worth.